In our programs, we teach people how to produce a 33% plus of GDV profit from their development site once it has been built out. Now, a lot of people think that this is not possible, and you'll find that many other trainers talk about the maximum you're probably going to get out is about 25% of GDV. But the reality is I did this on my first development, which I completed in 2006, and I've done it with every other development since. And we've taught our students who are actively doing it as well. So it's very much a viable proposition, but a lot of people don't understand how you're able to achieve this. And I talk about this in my book, You a Property Developer. If you turn to page 35 onwards, then I talk about this whole process. Incidentally, if you're new to the channel, please remember to subscribe. We've got only about 15% of our current subscriber base, or at least of our viewers, should I say, only about 15% have actually subscribed to the channel. So it would be great to see those numbers come up. So the first thing that we need to understand is that there are actually two profit centers when we do development properly. And the first one I'm going to talk about is your build profit. And this is what people often refer to when they talk about the 25% of GDV. They're only looking at the build profit, and they're actually leaving a significant amount of money on the table. But not only that, they're actually adding to the risk of their development in doing so. So when we look at the build profit, it's quite simple. We look at the GDV figure, and that's essentially what the built out site is going to sell for. So if that's, say, 4 houses, it's going to be a multiple of each of those 4 houses, what it's worth. So let's say it was worth 400,000 each house, then your GDV would be 1.6 million. So if we just put that figure in there, 1.6 million. And then the next thing that we need to do is that we actually deduct our profit before we actually look at any of the other expenditures. So our GDV, 25% on that, and this is our build profit, and I'm just going to call that BP, and that is going to be 400,000 as in this example. And then we look at our costs, and we do actually split our costs even, and we split that into 2 different areas. We talk about development costs and build costs. The build cost being the actual physical building itself, and then the development cost is essentially all the other costs associated with acquiring a site through to actually selling the site through. So those are our costs, and that's going to come into that figure there. Let's say for this example, per house is 250,000, so that would be £1 million in cost. And then that would then tell us what our land is worth. And so in order to achieve your 25% of GDV, you're going to have to build your land at that. So we take our 1 million, add it to our 400,000 profit, and take it away from our 1.6 million, which would, in this situation, would give us a land cost of 200,000. And that's essentially how you're going to work out your build profit and give you the land value. So that's the first part of it. And we take this through a 3-step process, which I'll talk about in a moment, called Detect, Detail and Deal. But then we look at, next we'll look at actually how do we get that difference I talk about from 25% to 33% plus, and it can be very much plus. I've done deals where it's been in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but when we look at that minimal amount, what we're really talking about is essentially 8%, the difference between the 25 and 33%. Then we're looking at 8%. Where does that come from? Well, essentially, this land which you are buying, and the way we recommend you buy land, and you probably can't do it any other way, in all honesty, is to look for for land that's not on the market. Because the reality is, if you've looked online to the likes of Zoopla, Prime Location, or looked in estate agents' windows, you will have found that price of land is just overly priced, that they cannot make this figure work. And part of the reason for that is it's often skewed to the self-build market, and therefore the price is what somebody is prepared to pay for it. As a developer, we can't afford that luxury. We have to make sure our numbers work, otherwise why be in business? So we have to really follow this formula. So our what we call our second profit is our development profit. And because you are taking this piece of land, which is ultimately going to be worth 200,000 with all the planning permissions in place, we've got to first of all take off our costs of attaining planning, but we've also got to take off the fact is that if, as a developer, we are going to put in so many different applications, most of them will be successful. Occasionally you're going to have an application that is not going to be successful, so you've got to mitigate and cover that cost. In addition, because you are the one applying for planning, unless you get the landowner to apply for it and take all of that risk, in which case you would pay them the 200,000. But if you are taking the risk and you are applying for planning permission, you're doing all that work, not just the cost of employing people to put that together, such as architects, town planners, but also your time, which is, has a value as well. So when you figure in all those costs, they are worth something, and therefore you've got to have a profit margin, as any business would, in order to cover those costs. You wouldn't just cover them at the cost price, because that makes no sense. You need to be paid for that proposition. And so therefore that's when we talk about, well, the margin should be at least 8% on that in order to make those figures work. Generally we'll go for a higher margin there, but that's essentially how you create your development profit. And it amazes me that people don't actually think that way. It's probably because they've never been taught that way to do it. They've come into the market probably in the last 10 years and they don't really understand the mechanics of it, and nobody really was there to teach them. I've had some very good mentors who essentially worked on the development profit. They didn't actually build out sites, but they worked on the development profit. In order for their business to work, they had to make a development profit. So that's how I've kind of learned that. I actually did do it myself with the first development because I kind of stumbled on it, but I actually did get some really good coaching from these people over the years and was able to capitalize on that. So that's the difference between build profit and development profit. The next thing that we want to look at is the actual process for doing this. So I talked about that there's 3 areas. So the first one I call detect. And detect is simply looking for your land. And as I mentioned before, that's going to be off-market land. So it's not as simple as looking on a website or looking in the estate agent's window. You actually have to hunt for that land. And there's various ways that you're going to do that. You're going to do some of your search online. Some of it you're going to do is what we call boots on the ground, knowing what you need to look for. There's various types of brownfield sites that might be available. It's really having an eye for what looks like a development site but won't necessarily look like a development site when you first look at it. So the thing that always amazes our students that we take through this process was that they say, we've driven past these sites for years and didn't actually identify that they were potentially development sites. And it's really, I use the car analogy to sort of like illustrate this. Imagine you got a certain make, a model and color of car that you suddenly become interested in buying. Previously you never really saw them there before. Now you're seeing them all over the place. It seems like everybody's got one and they're on the road all over the place. But the reality is it's now because your senses know what you're looking for, and it's become important to you, and so therefore you're able to identify them. So the first thing is actually finding potentially suitable sites. The second area is, or within that, then you're going to contact the landowner. Are they interested in selling? If they're interested in selling, then you start to go into the second phase, which is detail. And this is checking it out in detail. And we have a process of where you check it out in 3 different stages. You do a desktop appraisal. This means that you can actually carry out this appraisal in 20 to 30 minutes and understand whether this is a viable proposition or not. You wouldn't do that before you've contacted the landowner because you're actually going to have sifted through quite a number of sites, and that would be just a waste of your time. So you've got to make sure that there's a real opportunity to be able to purchase this piece of land before you'd actually start to do your assessment. So you check that out. If it passes that, then you go into a much more detailed assessment, and then finally you go into to a really thorough assessment of the site, and at that point you maybe are starting to bring some professionals in, you're having to spend a bit of money, so you want to be fairly far down the road to make sure that by the time you spend some money that this is a proposition that is very much likely to work. So now, having established that you've got a viable proposition, then you're going to go back to the landowner, present your findings from that, and that takes us into the deal stage. And the deal stage, we're going to talk about the profit that we need to get as a build profit, but we're also going to talk about the development profit. Now, a lot of people say, well, they'll be thinking, oh, how come you're making so much money out of this proposition? Well, part of it is that you explain to them the risks. We have a way of actually showing or presenting this, because the program that we use actually produces a presentation document for you to take to the landowner. But the reality is, does it work? Well, it's worked for us, but does it work for our students? So I'll give you an example of a recent acquisition. Well, when I say recent, it's about a year and a half ago, of a piece of land that was valued at 250 to 300,000 by a surveyor and has been purchased for 100,000. I myself have had the first development site that I bought produced a gross profit on gross development value of 35,000, 35% should I say, produced a profit of 105,000 on a sale of 290,000, as it was my first development, I'd certainly made a lot of mistakes. There was no training available in those days to do that, so it was very much I learned as I went along. I could have probably actually improved on that, and it was also in a declining market by the time we actually sold it, because it was actually in 2008 before we sold it, which some of you will know because of the global financial crisis that had a severe effect on the economy. The next site that I purchased actually produced a gross development value, or the percentage of profit on gross development value of over 60%. So that was kind of a unique situation, but it just does illustrate the fact that there is it's a mindset thing that you think you can only get 23, 24, 25%. So the reality is that you should be achieving a build profit and a development profit. So if that interests you, grab a copy of my book, You a Property Developer. And I've got a bonus for you when you do that. You will, a few days after the book has been dispatched, you will be invited to join a land finding course that I created especially to complement the book. And that will take you through the whole process from understanding what the planners are looking for right through to the point of where you're actually looking to fund your site. So a useful addition to the book. The book obviously covers some of those concepts as well, and you can get a copy of that book for just the price of postage and packaging. The book itself is free, £2.80, postage and packaging, and the book is yours. If you haven't subscribed, remember to subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to speaking to you next week with another video. Take care. Bye-bye.